Hey, everybody, welcome to Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Today, we are looking at players, and this again, way too early, so a lot can change on that. Players that I think could be potential targets next season based on stuff that happened this last year. This, of course, sort of excludes the possibility that any news about said players comes out over the next 2 to 3 months. And a lot of things can change. So this is just an exercise in trying to figure out directions that you can look early. There are a grand total of 7 or 8 names that we're going to talk about today. So not a great many, but I think it should be fun. It should be a nice way we can look back at this later and find out if these are guys that actually turned up or look to be kind of half decent. I'm Dan Besbris. Please hit that like button. Please subscribe, which, by the way, I cannot believe that the Old Man Squad YouTube page is growing in the dead of the offseason. That's a testament to you guys. It's a testament to my good buddy Noah Rubin, my good buddy Adam King, those guys putting out content this time of year, and their amazing litany, I say, of guests that have come on those shows. First name we're going to talk about today is Chet Holmgren, who finished this last year averaging 15 and 8, which, I mean, fine is sort of the end result of that. It doesn't jump off the page. It was lower than his rookie campaign in almost every way. He played in 32 games, averaged 2 fewer minutes per game this year, shot 4% lower at the free throw line, rebounds were about the same, assists were down, steals and blocks were the same, scoring was down, field goal percent was down. Chet Holmgren, as you guys might recall, was a player that I kind of faded this year. I thought that he was going to be overdrafted based on how impressive his long-delayed rookie season was, with a couple of notes on how we got to that point. I thought, for one, there was an expectation that he was just going to get better. There's sort of this blanket thought, player in the second year gets better. Not always the case, and even if a player does get better, you have to ask a question of kind of how much? What might change for them? Additionally, in terms of Chet, more specifically in this one, is that the Thunder brought in Isaiah Hartenstein, who was expected to take center minutes, because Chet could actually play the 4. He can space the floor. He can hit the three-pointer. He can move a little quicker on the defensive side. He's not as big. So for rebounding purposes, Hartenstein's going to be the guy that's bumping with other centers. And even if that wasn't going to change Holmgren's minutes all that much, it was going to change where on the floor he was standing in general when he got those minutes. What ended up happening this year was obviously something much worse. He suffered a messed up hip injury that knocked him out for 50 ball games and never really got himself recovered. The thing to note when you dig in on the Chet Holmgren stuff is that he actually got off to a pretty darn good start this year when Isaiah Hartenstein wasn't there. Remember that part of the equation. Hartenstein was out the first 6 weeks of the year. He came back while Holmgren was on the shelf. Remember, Chet got hurt. Here it is. You can see it on your screen on November 10th, about 5 minutes into that Golden State game. He had played about 10 games on the season before getting injured. In those games, prior to getting injured, you can just plug it in if you want. OKC's season opened on October 24th. But, you could put October 22nd. You want to put the end date. You can do all of this over at Basketball Monster. It's super easy. Make it October 8th so you don't include that last ball game. Holmgren played in 9 games. He averaged 29 minutes, 18 points, 9 rebounds, 3.8 defensive stats, and 52-78 were the splits. It was the very small incremental gain that everybody assumed was coming, but without Isaiah Hartenstein. So he was actually on pace to be pretty close to his ADP. He was ranked 16th after 9 games. And if he had kept that number up, he actually probably would have been ranked higher than that. But, the 3 blocks was probably going to come down. The 9.5 rebounds was likely to come down. We kind of knew some of these things were not going to hold over the entire year. But regardless, the start wasn't bad. This was a guy that was going mid to late second round in most drafts. I thought that was too early. And then the season happened. And so what does that mean for us going forward? The reason that he's a guy that I'm looking at as a possible target next year after fading this season is because a lot of what went wrong for Chet this year was injury related. Not all of it. Hartenstein is going to have an impact on him, but he's not going to play 27 minutes a game. That's not a number that's likely to stick, especially because, some of that was blowout related. Some of that was sort of artificially depressed minutes from coming back from injury related. He got a lot of days off down the stretch. That was also injury and team running away with first place record related. There are all these things that are not a guarantee to be in place again next year. Hartenstein will be there, so that problem persists. But nearly catastrophic season-ending injury, probably not going to happen 2 years in a row. Minutes being squashed by that, probably not going to happen 2 seasons in a row. Minutes being squashed because of too many blowouts. Could happen. Thunder are a damn good team, but maybe not quite to this extent. What I don't know is where Chet's going to go next year. So that's where this thing kind of potentially breaks down. And that's where all of our analyses are going to break down today, because I have no idea where any of these guys is going to get drafted next season. We can guess, and my assumption is that Holmgren is going to fall into the 3rd round this year. It's a guess, mind you. I don't know for sure. Maybe people are still extremely high on him. But with the minutes coming down and the stats coming down with it, Chet finished at number 48 this season. Do I think he's going to get drafted late 4th round? I don't, because he's young and people know what he's capable of. But I do think that, late 20s, early 30s is a distinct possibility. And then you're finally talking about a guy that has a little bit of built-in upside instead of kind of a little bit of built-in downside. Guys, the finals, if they ever decide to come back, are cooking. It's tomorrow. So many days off. And BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all sports betting action. You got baseball in full swing every day. You could always just bet baseball if you don't want to wait 5.5 days between NBA Finals matchups. You got the NHL going, and BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, scores, and even live in-game betting while the games are being played. BetOnline keeps the dog days of summer rolling with the largest selection of odds on everything, including updated odds on baseball, UFC, boxing, tennis, and even NFL futures right now. BetOnline remains the best online source for all sports wagering info. And in between games, head down to the BetOnline casino with all the top Vegas-style action, including poker, a live casino, 20 different types of blackjack, and more. BetOnline, the game starts here. Next name on the list of guys that I think might get a little bit underdrafted next year is old man Toby. I know, this is a boring one. But it's Tobias Harris, who I'll admit I was too high on this year. I'm one of the guys that got suckered in by that one. He opened up with an ADP of around 90. That was a number that moved and moved and moved and moved and moved until it started to push even my buttons. He opened at number 81, by the way. His initial pre-rank was 81. And I was like, yes, this is outstanding. And other people were like, ooh, this is interesting. And then his pre-rank jumped to 64, and then it jumped to 53. And so it kind of wiped the value out on Toby. I still took him in the 60s. It ended up being a small miss. He finished at number 80 per game on the year. So, not great. But he played in 73 ball games. It certainly could have gone worse. And now you're talking about a guy that had, a quiet season. Didn't really blow anybody away with his performance. He was sort of the same hiding in the shadows Tobias Harris. But one thing to keep in mind is that the second half of this year, Tobias was actually pretty good. So you could look at like January 15th to about April 13th, I think was the last day. Tobias Harris's rank has 35 games. Well, the rank, I guess, didn't change all that much, but he was at 14 points, 5.5 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 defensive, 51-85 splits for that second half of the year, as opposed to the 13.7 scoring number from the beginning part of the year. And the field goal percent was much, much higher. The steals were much higher. There was a lot that happened there that sort of like limited sample size guys that were in front of him. If he came back out this season and averaged 14, 5.5, and 2 with 2 defensive stats and shot 51% from the field and 85 of the foul line, he'd be a top 60 guy. So by all accounts, Tobias Harris was a top 60 type of player second half of the season. Or if you wanted to do like after the All-Star break, that's also a perfectly to look at it, where he was top 50 on numbers that were basically those same numbers. You just wipe out some of the limited sample size guys. He averaged 15 and 6, 2.1 defensive stats, 53-84 splits. And over the last 25 games of the year, he was number 47. That's the Tobias Harris we thought we were drafting. We just didn't get it until the second half of the season when he settled in. And yeah, Jaden Ivey was down for part of that, and that probably helped a little bit. But more than anything, it wasn't like his number of shots per game dramatically increased when Jaden Ivey went down. In fact, it was almost exactly the same. He took it might have been less even. I think he took 11 and change shots before the Jaden Ivey injury, and he took 10.9 after. He just started making them. He got warmer. He got more comfortable. He sort of settled into his role. And I think that that's repeatable for him. 14 and change points, that's a pretty easy number to get to. 30 and a half minutes a game. He played good minutes all season long. He was always around 30, 31, 32 minutes a game. I'm hoping that there's maybe even another small gear for Toby. If he starts to make a few more shots, maybe he gets to 11 and a half shots per game. Maybe not. Even if he doesn't, his efficiency and just quiet production still has the sort of quiet aroma of a top 50, top 60 guy. And I think he probably slides back towards the 80s this year after sitting in the 80s last season. So perhaps we were a little bit too early on old man Tobias, who was born all the way back in 1992. Oh, yes. He's got his 33rd birthday coming up just about a month from right now. He's a rustic fellow. He's old. He's long in the tooth, gray in the beard. But if he just does the same thing next year that he did the second half of this season, that's a top 50 fantasy play, especially in 9-cat, where the turnovers are particularly low. Here's an interesting one. Aneka Okongu is the next name on our list. And I this is not one that I'm talking about because he's coming off a bad season. In fact, Okongu had a terrific year. But here's the sort of why do I think there's a chance he might get underdrafted? I think Okongu might get underdrafted because he finished this season as number 60 in 9-cat leagues, helped, like Tobias was, by very low turnovers at just 1.2 per game. Low scoring, 13.4. 9 rebounds is fine, but not big defensive stats, about a steal and a block per game. Good percentages, especially out of a center spot. And just sort of all-around numbers that didn't really leap off the page. But what I think perhaps only people who had him rostered saw was a final closing stretch from Okongu, the last 20 games this year, where he was top 15 in 9-cat. And the numbers still don't jump off the page. But he has almost a little bit of like a cat without the scoring sort of feel to it. He averaged 16 points per game, only 1 3-pointer, 11 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 1.2 steals, 1 block, 56% from the field, 83% at the free throw line, and only 1.5 turnovers per game. And if you're thinking, wow, that sounds great, why'd you call him a light cat? Well, I shouldn't have, because over that same stretch, Cat was number 39. He did score about a half dozen points more than Okongu, but almost every other category, Okongu was better the last 20 games this year. I think Cat had him by about half a 3-pointer also. Tied in rebounds, tied in assists. Okongu beat him in steals, beat him in blocks, beat him in field goal percent, beat him in free throws, which is crazy. Now, admittedly, Cat took more, so weighted averages, that almost comes out to a bit of a wash. So if you're thinking about spending your 3rd, 4th pick on Karl Anthony Towns, I would say maybe kind of check yourself a little bit and say, is this a guy that I really want to spend like a top 4 pick on in Cat? Or would I rather target Aneka Okongu a couple of rounds later and just like get almost all the same categories without the scoring? I'll get the scoring from someone else earlier. What I don't know and this is going to be how almost all of these analyses end as we're talking through these players. I don't know where Okongu is going to get drafted next year. I'm hoping that people are like, oh, well, he was like number 60 overall, but he was a little bit better than that down the stretch. I'll take him at like 45 or 50. I think Okongu has a very good case to be someone you take in the third round. I know that's crazy. I know it kind of maxes him out a little bit, but he's the second half of this year, he was basically Evan Mobley. What was Mobley during that stretch? What were his numbers? Let's find him. He was down the board. 18 and a half points, 9 rebounds. He outblocked him, okay? Mobley outblocked him. Give you that, Evan. But Okongu had a way better free throw number. Like way better free throw number. If you're thinking about drafting Evan Mobley late in the second round or early in the third, see how far Okongu falls. Maybe you can get him in the fourth. So we're talking about like budget copycats of some guys that are definitely going to go high. And all you're sacrificing in both of them so far is a little bit of scoring. And you guys know me. I'm not to say you have to punt points, but man, life gets a little bit simpler when you do. Next name on the list is Mark Williams, and there's some fear involved in this one. If it's going to require that you draft Mark Williams inside the top 50, I don't think I would recommend doing it because, like most of the Hornets, he's not making it through any seasons, and until he does, I find it hard to say this is a guy you need to go out on a limb and get. But while Aneka Okongu was rolling top 15 down the stretch, Mark Williams was rolling top 30 with remarkably similar numbers. What did I say Okongu was at during that stretch? 16 and 11. Mark Williams, 15 and 11. Assists, almost a dead heat. 2.8, Mark Williams. 2.4, Okongu. Okongu beat him by 0.3 of a steal. Williams beat him by 0.4 of a block. Mark Williams, better field goal, equal free throws, and Williams 2.4 turnovers. The one place you could point and say, yeah, Okongu's got him there. 3 balls. Onyeka hit a 3-pointer per game. Mark Williams hit none. But, I mean, I would argue that between those two guys, just straight up fantasy stat set, Mark Williams might be the more interesting one. But the body part is a big deal. I mean, he had a trade rescinded because of things other than his back. That's horrifying to think of, that there's other stuff going on. But, like, if we're going to come down to turnovers, take the guy who has a slightly higher turnover number if you think he's going to stay upright. I don't know. But again, I feel pretty confident that, like, if you're looking at centers, Mark Williams is going to be at a discount because he can't stay upright. Maybe this is a roto-only pick as we get closer to the season, if you don't want to trust the Hornets to actually play their guys down the stretch or whatever. But, like, let's say you could get Mark Williams at pick 55 to 65 range. He's got that big per-game upside with the health risk that just screams fifth-round roto games cap guy. Alternatively, let me jump to another player that I think you might be able to get in that same spot that will also be more of a roto games cap play, and that's Jimmy Butler the third. Just needed to throw that in there. I don't think I've called him the third even one time on this podcast, but I did it today, so screw it. Jimmy Butler is another instance of a guy who actually was like, if he had played this season, it would have been a very good year. Post trade to Golden State, Butler was top 15. You know who was number 14? Aneka Okongu. You know who was number 15? Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler averaged 18 and a half points, 5.5 rebounds, 6 assists, 1.8 steals, almost a 3-pointer. Yay. 49% from the field, 87% at the free throw line. This was like old school Jimmy Butler, just hyper efficiency. And wasn't even that great field goal percent-wise. But he was locked in. He cared. You can always tell when Jimmy Butler cares by just looking at his defensive stats. Especially now, as he's kind of gotten older. The defensive stats have been on this steep decline in Miami, where you're like, is he just like too old to get steals now? No, probably not. Probably just didn't really want to be a part of it. Rebounding was lower. Steals were lower. Free throw percent went away. I mean, that's just like straight lack of focus. You got to be able to dig deep for these types of things. And he just wasn't digging deep for Miami anymore. Now, in his defense, he was shooting the ball well. A lot of 2-pointers right up at the rim. But there's actually room for him to be better than he was in Golden State. If the steals hold and his field goal percent comes back up from 47.5 to 50 or whatever you want to call it, like he's been a 50% guy a few times lately. Put him at 49.5, something like that. But he's an always something guy. I'm an always something guy. And I got to tell you, I'm sick and tired of it. I hate being an always something guy, but I chose to have 2 kids and be the work at home parent. So now I'm the always something guy. Jimmy Butler's an always something guy. COVID, bruised butt, whatever it might be, bitching to get out of Miami. He's always missing something. 18 games is about the best case missed game scenario for him lately. And so again, this is a guy where you might be able to get him in the late 4th, 5th round, but that may only make sense in Roto Games Cap, and it may only make sense if you've gone very safe through your first 3 or 4 rounds before getting to him. But I'll tell you what, if I'm going safe, top 3 picks or 4 even, and Butler's there at like pick 51, I will take him 100 times out of 100. So yes, he or Mark Williams, you're not going to do both. That's way too much risk. But one or the other in a Roto Games Cap format, I think I feel pretty okay about that. 2 more names. First one, Emanuel Quickley. And I don't know if I believe in this one, but I put him on the list because I think he has a chance to be sort of a post-type guy. He didn't play a ton down the stretch for Toronto. He didn't play a ton at large for Toronto this year. But over his last dozen games, he averaged 19, 4, and 6 with a steal and 3 3-pointers. Very good free throw, very bad field goal. Pretty typical shooting guard fantasy stat set with a little bit of a bump in assists. And that's the part that I don't know if it's going to stick next year. He was going too early this season. We were able to shy away from him because his ADP bumped up into the mid 40s, and that was not a spot I wanted to take him. I was happy taking him in the 50s or 60s. So, yeah, that still would have been wrong. So I still got it wrong. But we dodged a bullet because we were lower than consensus on him at the very end. He was worse than I predicted, but we predicted worse than most, so we didn't end up with him. Better to be lucky than good sometimes, I suppose. But I think if Quickley now falls back into that 60s, 70s range, now is the time you take a look at him. Kind of like Jordan Poole the prior year, who got bumped up into the 30s and 40s, and that was way too early. And it was like the same exact discussion. Going into last draft season, not this recent one, but the prior one, in the middle of 2023, I was like, hey, Jordan Poole, he's opening up as like a 60-something pre-ranked guy. That's intriguing. And then by the end, it was like 38. I was like, no, no, I can't do that. And then this year, I was like, great, Jordan Poole's actually getting drafted in the 70s this time. Let's do it. That might be what you get out of Emanuel Quickley this time around. Toronto should probably be competitive this year. I know they was sort of half-assed it this season, but they just gave Brandon Ingram a bunch of money. They have a starting lineup that should be able to compete with most teams they play against. So tanking, I think, would be kind of hard. And if Quickley's healthy, and Scotty Barnes and Brandon Ingram and Jakob Poeltl and RJ Barrett, like if that's a healthy starting 5, they'll go out there, they'll put up a little bit of numbers. But I think you're probably looking at a Quickley that finishes somewhere in the 50 to 80 range. So I'm not willing to go earlier than that. But if you can get him, around pick 60 to 70, I think he ends up as a relatively safe play there who can give you some scoring, assists, threes, free throw percent kind of upside. And that plays in those middle rounds. And the last name on this list may make no sense to you. And you'd be right to say, Dan, what the hell are you talking about? And that name is Ivica Zubac, who we were very high on this year, saw his pre-ranks fly up the board. From 112 is where he started, and 75 is where he finished. It was one of the biggest jumps in all of fantasy basketball. And it wasn't enough. And he's another guy where I don't think people realize precisely how good he was down the stretch. He was very good Altogether, he was number 30 on the season, playing in 80 out of 82 possible games. Not only was he good, but he was extraordinarily durable, and he has been extraordinarily durable basically every year for 6 seasons running. Even the 2 COVID years, he played all 72 games. Then he missed 6, 6, 14, and 2. He missed 2 games while playing a career high, basically doing everything in a career high amount this last year. That's awesome. That's amazing. So a nice half dozen years of durability is just the icing on the cake. And so you look at it, you're like, wow, top 30, that's pretty remarkable. He was at 17 points, 12 and a half rebounds, a block, and excellent field goal percent. And that got him to top 30 on the year. But again, much like with Aneka Okongu, I don't know that people realize exactly how good he was the last 25 games. You know how we talked about Okongu was number 14 and Jimmy Butler was number 15? Ivica Zubac was number 16 over that same exact amount of time. Sandwiched between Austin Reeves and Dyson Daniels. I know. It's a funny list. But over that last stretch, and this is when Kawhi Leonard was mostly back, Zubac averaged 20 and almost 13, still shooting 65% from the field, but got his free throw number up to 72 instead of 66 for the entire year, and low 60s where it was prior to that late season run. So this is a guy in Zubac, and I don't know that he's going to be an early second round guy. I don't think he's someone that's going to average 20 points a game this coming year, but he might be someone that could actually be better than the top 30 number he finished at. Would I draft him in the first 2 rounds? Probably not, because he's not a building block type of player in the traditional sense, as in he's very, very, very good at rebounding, very, very, very good at field goal percent, but doesn't really excel at anything else in the way that most of the guys at the top of the board, the ones that you're spending your draft capital on, you want these guys to be elite in like 3 or 4 things and still okay in a couple others. Zubac is more of the like, oh, you get all the traditional big man stuff and not much else. And he doesn't block that many shots. This is not my attempt to try to talk him down. You get to rank 30 because you're good. The 1.6 turnovers is another reason why he ended up that high. But just think about, and like even on this show alone, think about the centers we've talked about as guys that tend to slip a little bit, but we don't know how much. So you got Chet Holmgren, who might slip. You've got Aneka Okongu, who might not be as hyped as he should be. Mark Williams, who admittedly is a terrifying pick, but incredible fantasy game. And Ivica Zubac. In my eyes, plus, by the way, on top of all of that, you've got the Jarrett Allen corridor waiting for you anyway. So Jarrett Allen, Miles Turner, if you want to go as early as Evan Mobley, as late as Nikola Vucevic, there are at least another 3 to 5 centers that could all just sort of fall in this very safe center run. The question is, where do they end up falling? And which of them have a chance to beat that mark of where they're being drafted? We can't possibly know that until August at the absolute earliest, but those are the guys that I looked at. And I looked at basically everybody inside about the top. I looked at drafts from last year to see mostly ADPs, but actually like where these guys really went. I pretty much looked at everybody drafted in the first 110, 115 to see, well, is this a guy that might not get drafted as high as they should next year? And let's figure out why I feel that way. And so for Zubac and Okongu and Mark Williams, I'm not sure people, and Jimmy Butler, I'm not sure people saw how good they were the last 8 weeks of the season. For Tobias Harris, I'm not sure people saw how quietly solid he was the second half. For Chet Holmgren, I think people are just pissed that they wasted a pick on him. Same story with Emanuel Quickley. And I think that's all the players I talked about as I recap them. Right? Right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Like, rate, subscribe to Old Man Squad. I'm Dan Vespers on Twitter, Old Man Squad on Twitter and Blue Sky, and I will see you guys again with some show that I haven't devised yet tomorrow. Later for now.